Good afternoon, everyone. I am Fran Moisa, a headhunter and talent advisor, broadcasting live from lovely Malta. Well, the same as last time, because it doesn't look like we'll be able to go anywhere for the time being. And today's topic on SHIO is business innovation and ethical leadership. I'm really excited that Deborah Webster agreed to have this broadcast with me. For those of you who do not know Deborah, she is an entrepreneur and startup enabler. She has developed the Amani Circle Founders Program, where she identifies high-performing entrepreneurs and creates the right ecosystem for them to thrive in. She's a trusted advisor to many startups, founders, investors, and corporations in various locations ranging from Dubai and Europe, including Malta as well. So I'm sure she'll have some really, really cool stuff to share with us today, especially as that she's known for being very, very straightforward talking. So without any further ado, I would like to welcome to the stream Deborah. Deborah, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you are in lovely France today,
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. And Deborah, as I was telling the audience, you have been a trusted advisor to not only startups, entrepreneurs, but big and large corporations throughout your career as a headhunter, as an advisor, as a startup enabler. And you would have seen a lot of the good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess, in business. And I guess what I would like to start off with, because it's quite a broad topic, is to understand from your experience, if you could share with us, what does business innovation has to do with ethical leadership? You know, what's the connection between the two?
Wow. Okay, how to do that in a bite-sized piece. So first of all, what's innovation? The problem with innovation actually is that it's become a buzzword, right? But innovation at its essence is to look at the way things are being done and to do them better. And when I was on your side of the fence, when I was in executive search, the narrative at the time was that there was a war for talent. And in my experience, that's actually not true. It's challenging, yes, but there isn't a war for talent. The biggest challenge I had is finding great companies that deserve great people. And the leadership piece was really important. And what I have found is the people that we refer to as leaders are not actually leaders. They're people in positions of power. And I always create these distinctions. So just because you have a title doesn't mean you're a leader. And it actually breaks my heart that we have to say ethical leadership, because leadership actually should be about ethics. It should be about having a high bar. It should be about having the courage to do what is right, even if it is uncomfortable or unpopular. So I hope that...
Yes. Yes, you are right, and I'm in agreement with you to have that. The fact that we have to name it as ethical leadership and to put those two together really kind of puts in the spotlight a challenge that we are faced with when it comes to interacting with businesses or with consumers alike. And I think when we were talking before, Deborah, we looked at how COVID, and as much as I hate sometimes to bring it up because it's such a, exhausted topic across the board for everyone. I think, we're all tired and sick of hearing about it, but it has brought onto light, a truth be told, behavior of businesses and behavior of consumers as well, and how they relate to those businesses. And in some cases, if you look at social media, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, for example, a lot of companies were called out for the way that they've behaved towards not only their consumers, but their employees alike. So when we talk, in my opinion as well, when we talk about ethical leadership and business innovation, there are a lot of benefits to be reaped from practicing ethical leadership and from instilling that into business practices. And, one of them being able to access good quality investors over a long period of time, which is something that you have a lot of experience in.
It's funny, the alignment of founders with investors is critical, and I don't think it gets enough airtime. So what do we mean by this? So in very simple terms, founders set out with this great vision. They want to solve a particular problem. They've got a particular way of going about it. And of course, they have to pitch to investors in order to get them on board. sometimes, unfortunately, in order to get the money, they are willing to let go of certain things. And this is big and small alike. And if we look, for instance, into Google's early days, the mantra was to do no evil. And then they saw how much money they could make from data, and things start to, there's like this mission creep is what I call it. And I've got a lot of anecdotes from the individuals I've met with and advised, and I think frowned at, because they have these wonderful, we hear a lot about companies need to have, know your why and have your purpose and have your mission. That's all well and good, but another distinction I make is there's a difference between substance and spin. It's very easy to say, we're democratizing this or we're doing the other, but the real magic is actually lies in a word that you mentioned, which is practices. And so what we have found is the bigger the gap between what a company sets out to do and what they do in practice, the bigger the gap, the greater potential reputational damage, the greater potential impact if, for instance, the company is public. If there's reputational damage, the share price goes down. And the lack of the higher probability that the best people will bail and you disengage others.
Yeah. Indeed, because like we were saying, it's very important for businesses to understand also what's in it for them, by practice. It's all good and well we talk about, ethical leadership and so on, but it's so important to understand the ramification it has onto their commercial well-being at the end of the day, and onto their market positioning. And if I can take you back slightly of what you said earlier, the distinction between leaders, true leaders, and people in position of power. Could you go in a bit more detail what you meant by that, and what is, how can we recognize them?
Okay. So
don't hold back.
There's this. If we look at politics, for instance, and you look at the role of a prime minister or a president, first of all, it fascinates me how there's no job spec anywhere, which I find really interesting. When you apply for any role in the world, there is a job spec, there's an interview process, and there's a rational process to get the right person in the role. With our supposed political leaders, that's not the case. And when you look at the character, when you look at the decisions that they oftentimes make short-term decisions in order to win the next vote, as opposed to the tough choices in order that actually make sure that the country is more sustainable going forward. I don't need to call out any particular examples at the moment. Everyone listening is smart enough to figure out for themselves. But I think that's a really good example of people in positions of power versus leaders. I look around the world, I don't see many leaders, sadly.
Indeed. And it's a very interesting point, that of the job description and how we assess that people that are supposed to serve us or lead us somewhere. And it's also very important, I believe, part of the ethical leadership mantra to understand that reaching the goal is not as important as the person you become by reaching that goal. And this is something that Gert said, it's paraphrased. And I think, like you said at the beginning, when we set out with a mission, with a goal of what we want to achieve, sometimes we can get lost along the way. And it's very important to have those solid pillars of foundation that are very deep rooted in choosing what is right, in making the right decisions, no matter the circumstances, to see us through any hurdles that will come our way, because they will, come our way. And in your experience, Deborah, I know this is going to sound odd, but I have a purpose for asking that. How can one practice or become an ethical leader?
Oh, okay. So first, to expand upon something you mentioned about when you make decisions and about the person you become, when you have a leadership role, it's the person you become, but also the people that you're responsible for and the people that they become. So because we unfortunately come across these situations where you've got good people with good value sets whose intentions are to do good, but then they're put into situations where they have to make decisions that don't sit right with them, because sometimes, for instance, they're either afraid of losing their job, they're afraid of retribution, they're afraid of missing out on their promotion, and I think that's sad. So a tip to how to be an ethical leader, good Lord.
If only there was a blueprint to that.
Can you kind of make it a simpler question?
I know it's a difficult question, but it would be great to kind of.
Okay, so you really have to dig deep within yourself and ask yourself, okay, so what are you doing and why does it matter? And then you kind of have to, before you set out, you need to kind of have your own rules of the road, like the go, no-go, no-go issues. So I'll give you an example. There was this phenomenal guy who was setting up an investment fund, triple bottom line, so good for the investors, good for the community. So it was very impactful. It was focused on Africa. And we worked on his vision and his values. And then I said, okay, well, let's test them against some of your investments. And one of them was pizza, which I love pizza. My husband thinks it's the 4 food groups. I've got clients who are in pizza, nothing against pizza.
Who doesn't, eh?
And I just asked him a simple question. I was like, okay, so is pizza good for the African body type? Now, I don't have the answer for that, but if you want to have an impact fund, for instance, you need to look at the positive and also the negative. And this is the first case study, right, that we're testing, first investment that we're testing. And he said, no, but it makes good money. It's like, okay, well, you have to decide which matters more. So for me, truth matters, right? So I'm going to respect someone far more if they say, I don't care about the consequences, I just care about money. At least they're being transparent. Than someone who says, we want to do good, and they're actually causing a lot of harm along the way. Everyone has their own code. There are common human values, but there's a cultural piece as well that we need to bear in mind, which we can touch upon later if you want.
Yes, and yes, definitely. I would like us to touch upon it, because cultural sort of, I wouldn't say necessarily, I'm trying to look for the right word. This is the problem with live. I can't take my time to think about it, but culture does make a difference in the way that we perceive and in the way that we assess certain situations. What might seem perhaps wrong to me or unethical to me, it might not necessarily be the case in a different culture. And I'm not talking here about blatant, obvious rights and wrongs, that are transcendent across any culture, but sometimes even about corporate behavior. Have you ever come across such a situation where, culture did make a difference in what was perceived as being ethical?
Big time. So there's a great example which I always think is so mind-blowing. So I was having a conversation with one of the board members that I've advised a lot on, and he was really upset about. Okay, so let me give you the background. So it was a telecoms company operating in emerging markets, and this particular business was in sub-Saharan Africa. And because I'd done some project with communities in sub-Saharan Africa, I knew the situation on the ground and the importance of the village elder, the village elder's wife, and so on and so forth. So this individual was hired from the local community, and the company seemed to have done such a good job of building trust in the local community that this person was, okay, I'm kind of giving away the punchline. This guy was caught taking money out of the company, paying it back before the next accounting cycle. Now, from our terms, and from global corporate governance standards, that's theft. But understanding cultural dynamics, I had a hunch about something, that the company had built so much trust and credibility in the brand that anyone who was working in the company from the local community became a modern day elder, which meant that they were duty bound to help their fellow members. So they went and they looked into this. And in fact, that was the case. This guy was being asked to help for particular circumstances. So instead of the guy getting fired, what we ended up doing was creating a special kind of CSR fund with specific uses. So if anyone was asked any questions, they could apply to get money from this fund, and then do it that way. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good example as well of innovation and ethical leadership. It's that we have
Absolutely.
jump into conclusions. And I think that's unwise. I think it's smart to take a breath, take a step back, ask the proper questions, have empathy, care, listen to the words and the non-words, and then you
decide on a course of action. We have a question coming in, Deborah. I'm going to put it on the screen here from Amy. So it says that, would an ethical leader have at the forefront values versus monetary gain? Sometimes the business has tough choices and choosing the people versus short-term gain. Sorry, don't need to be sorry. It's a great question, Amy, and thank you for posing it to us.
It is a brilliant question. Okay, right. So having a sustainable business means that it actually needs to make money, right? If you make bad business decisions that impact the company's financial viability in the medium and long run, that's actually, one could say, is unethical behavior, right? Or instead of unethical, maybe irresponsible. So do you have to weigh things out? Absolutely. But there's a way of doing things. And I think that's where the ethical piece comes in. So if, for instance, so let's look at the COVID situation, right? Instead of a company making a fait accompli decision on which employees, for instance, are to be released, perhaps having a conversation with them and say, okay, these are our options. And then having like this dialogue and this conversation, because it's not always cut and dried. I'm always very averse to having a one-size-fits-all solution, because that's not the case. And I think that's the issue that a lot of leaders have. Like you really have to grapple with situations, but being a leader also means, and you're responsible, you do have to make tough decisions. But then there's a way about it, right? So for instance, I was in this situation, gosh, many moons ago, where this company was embezzling funds, and if I left the company, it would have been a signal that something was wrong, and the team would have left, and they would have left into no jobs, and they wouldn't have been paid. If I stayed, I was lulling them to false security, and that was also a bad option. So I didn't like option A, I didn't like option B. So I created option C, which was calling all the recruiting companies in town, finding them all jobs before I actually left. So there was a bit more of not a handover per se, but you can do things to mitigate the potential bumps along the way.
Very good. Amy, I hope that answered your question, and thank you for sharing it with us. And in your opinion, Deborah, when a leader finds themselves in that position, like you said, sometimes we have two roads ahead of us, and it's very difficult due to certain circumstances, obligations, and other things that come into play when making that sort of decision. How can a leader ensure they make the right decision? What tips would you have to share with them?
Look, make sure you are reading the information correctly. Making sure that your own inner shadow isn't actually affecting or impacting your judgment. What I mean by that is sometimes the best decision impacts us personally far more than anybody else. And putting ourselves on the line and our head on the chopping block is sometimes a difficult decision to make. This sounds weird and goofy. Operate out of love, not out of fear. There's something about and reach out to people that you trust. Having a sounding board and showing that you're vulnerable in in having to tackle a tough decision, I think is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness. I think sometimes some people think that because they're the leader that they have to have all the answers themselves. I think that's folly. I don't think anyone expects anyone to have all the answers and to have the humility, the wisdom and the courage to seek counsel from others. Go for a walk, sleep on it, don't do anything rash. We are in this, unfortunately, people expect us to, for instance, reply to emails straight away, and we have lost the art of being considered and considerate. There are particular traits, and having compassion, I think, really matters. The way things are communicated as well, even if it's a tough decision, I think the tonality and the manner in which it's communicated has a huge impact as well. Yeah.
Agreed. Agreed with all those points, especially when it comes to treating matters with empathy. I think that's very, very important, and trying to understand the other person's position in the discussion, how they are impacted, and creating that environment where people can express themselves, and they can also help you along the way. Because another thing you said, which I find very, very interesting, is that a leader doesn't need to have all the answers, and they don't have all the answers, for sure. Sometimes I think in the last couple of years, this leadership persona has been created of, supercharged CEOs, and it's like sometimes when you read articles, you're thinking like, is this portrayal even human? Like, holding all the answers, having the poker face, do this, do that, and the other. And it's very irresponsible, I think, also to give such advice. And one in particular that drew my attention, which I think has a very good connection with what we're discussing today, is motivating people to join you in your mission, which I think is great on the surface, but it's also kind of missing out on what people that are with you in your journey also want, and how they perceive that mission from their standpoint. So I think it's a great statement to have. It's a beautiful thing to think about and discuss over a glass of wine or two or maybe more. But it's also very important, to put that into perspective of the people that are in your journey as well.
Well, it's funny you should say that, actually. So, because that brings us to the word amani. So amani means aspirations and wishes in Arabic, and it means peace and harmony in Swahili. I also later realized it's man at the center of AI, which is, I've got a thing about technology and humanity and seeing the overlap of those two. But I've interviewed some phenomenal people around the world, and every single one of them, one of the magic sources behind kind of the model and the success of the model was, within every single person lies an aspiration, a wish. And if that aspiration is in alignment with the leader's aspiration and the company's mission, you're actually going to get a lot more from that person. You're going to get higher engagement. You're going to get higher return on investment. And you just see them blossom. Like this one guy I remember, I think he joined this amazing investment bank that I love working with. I think he joined them, it was pre-financial crisis. And I still remember his aspiration. And today he's still with the bank, and he actually has the portfolio that he aspired to have. And it's these little stories that just kind of make me smile, because it's, helping someone fulfill their aspirations is, I find, magical. It's such a privilege. But finding them, I think, is so important. And this is I know that probably people listening to this understand your work, and I really want to stress the importance of what you do, because there is an art to interviewing. And I think we really, really miss so much magic in that. So when we interview someone, we're setting up the game that we're judging someone. We're actually not going to get their best. But if we get their story, if we understand what makes them tick, if we understand what brought them success, we're more likely to be on. That's really understanding their personal algorithm, right? Like, are they a safe pair of hands? Can they do this? Like, what magical skills do they have? Like, what secret skills do they have that may not be in black and white on their CV? I hate CVs. I don't understand how anyone can read them like they're gobbledygook to me. People's stories are fascinating, though.
Indeed, indeed, and it's very difficult sometimes when everything is in a rush. Rush products to the market, rush services to the market, making that impression, creating that illusion to really sit and listen, which goes back to your advice to business owners, CEOs, or, leaders, to take a step back and really think it through. And have the patience, to let their emotions and everything settle within themselves. And we've got another question. I'll upload it to the screen now from Bart Phillips. He's asking, which are the core values of a modern ethical leader? Good one.
Interesting question. Look, values are a very personal thing, really. There are some uniting ones. I would counsel you to look at something else instead. There are 7 aspects. There's competence. The person's got to be brilliant at what they do. There's character. Character is things like courage, trustworthiness. They have integrity, how they make difficult decisions, and that's in their story and in their track record. Commitment is another very important. You can have someone who's brilliant at something, but if their heart isn't in it, if they, would rather be doing something else, you're actually not going to get the best out of them. Conscientiousness, being considerate, being a strong communicator. And communication is an interesting one, because a lot of people assume that communication is with others. And there's a very important piece of communication, which is with yourself, and listening to what your inner self is really telling you. I mean, how many times have we or others been in a situation where they get to a particular point and they look back like, how did I get here? And we don't kind of check in with ourselves. So one practice, for instance, to do that is self-reflection and reflecting on the decisions that we made. We make errors all the time, but being able to take a moment to reflect on those and learn from those, I think really matters. So yeah, if I'm happy to, I used to write a lot, actually. If anyone would like me to expand upon any of these within an article or something, please let me know and I will do so. It's just the reason I hesitate to do that anymore these days is there's so much noise out there. I don't want to bombard people. I don't want to bombard people and add more to that noise. So I hope that helps, Bart.
Great. Thank you, Bart, and I hope that answered your question. If not, do let us know. We are drawing close to the end of the broadcast, so if anyone else has any questions, I would encourage you to type them in the comments, either on YouTube, on Facebook, depending on from where you are watching. So Deborah will be able to answer them. And Deborah, one thing that I would like also to bring up is a little bit about your work, because one of your missions is to bring to life, if you will, ethical and sustainable startups that can make a difference to their ecosystem and the sector that they operate in. Correct?
So it's not just startups. So I work a lot with family businesses as well, who are going through transition. So there is a succession issue, but also these companies are being disrupted. So I help. It's actually a fantastic way of bringing both generations together, and we have a vision of the future. So what kind of future do you want to see? What world do you want to see 10, 20 years from now? And there's then you step it back from there. One of the interesting things is that actually draws out, and back to Bart's question before, it actually draws out what their own values are. So what's from some of the work that I did before with families, I found that the ones that have a family philosophy and family values kind of that connects them are more likely to transition from one generation to the next. Family business and transition are fascinating. And I love also helping companies find their quiet innovators. There are these brilliant people sitting in companies that have solutions, but they're quiet. And unless you ask them, unless you create the circumstances for them to put their head above the parapet, they will never tell you what they're thinking. And I think there's so much lost gold in our companies. And just like if we just look at, all you need is a handful of brilliant people to come together, and you can solve some of the most complex issues. But it's not about silo thinking, and I think this is one of the issues with old ways of doing things. The more cross-disciplinary we are and kind of behave more like bees and kind of cross-pollinate, I think more. Yeah, I think there's some geniuses out there that we need to find them and bring them out.
Agreed. And it's a beautiful and super interesting way to look at the future, Deborah, and thank you for sharing it with us. We have reached kind of the end of it. We've tried, together to cover as much as possible, but as Deborah said, her details are rolling on the screen. If you need her help with anything, do reach out. She's great, if I can say so myself, and I do admire you and your work a lot. And I'm pretty sure we'll have the opportunity to do other broadcasts on other topics as well.
Thank you. May I just leave one parting thought with our listeners? Look, sometimes people think you're crazy for trying to do the right thing, but the more of us stand up and do what is right, the more space we give others to do likewise. So don't worry too much about what others think or what others may do. Just do what is right. As long as you do your best, that's fine.
Beautiful. Deborah, thank you very, very, very much for joining us. Have a lovely afternoon.
And you. God bless.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.